hitmen are on the move. One renegade is on the run. And a beautiful girl is in the middle.
Yummy.
This is the movie critics call the motion picture event of the year. Pulp Fiction, rated R.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the final Not Content Podcast episode 2024. My name is Jerome Cuson. Here tonight, we are going to be doing something very, very special. We will be discussing the top 10 movies, Brian and I's top 10 movies of 1994, 30 years ago. Generally regarded as one of the best movie years of all time. So we are going to be revealing our top 10 for the year 1994. Next month, Ben Phillips and I will be coming back to record the top 10 of 2024. And I'm sure we'll be doing some comparing and contrasting, looking at trends and all that good stuff. But for today, we will be discussing 1994. That is what our focus is going to be on. I can imagine there is going to be a lot that we have in common, and I'm sure there will be a couple of surprises along the way. If you would like to follow me on BlueSky, you may do so at JeromeC1985. You can also like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Please click the bell icon for notifications. Leave a 4 or 5-star review on Spotify or Apple to get those wonderful algorithms going. Brian, I know that you have been putting in some late nights here, burning the midnight oil, getting this list ready, and very soon we'll be revealing it. But Brian, how are you feeling about the year 1994?
What a year, man. I didn't even get to finish the loose ends on my list. Like, I did not get to Clear and Present Danger, which I think is okay. I don't think it's going to be top 10 anyway, but I guess it would be an honorable mention considering that it's Harrison Ford and a good cast and all. I did not get to watch Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, which I know was another one I wanted to kind of slip on the list because it's a foreign film that kind of gets overlooked because it's from the 90s. And then I didn't get to watch Hoop Dreams because I just figured, a 3-hour documentary on basketball. We know these kids don't really go anywhere. It's like a slice, it's like a slice of time. You know what I mean? Like from that point in 1994, where were kids trying to go in terms of their basketball career and stuff like that? So kind of avoided that one because I knew that was going to be a drag. But a lot of people in 94 had Hoop Dreams in their top 10. A lot of people had number 1. So I guess it's not going to be on my list, but I guess it's like an honorable mention, even though I haven't seen the movie. But you got to give credit where credit's due. A lot of people loved that movie when it came out, but it hasn't had the love since it's come out since. So that's why I kind of focused on more of the more popular ones.
It may or may not be talked more about on this podcast, Brian. So you might want to watch yourself.
I know, I'm just making for myself, but I just couldn't find the 3-hour time. It was like this or like a Studio Ghibli movie, and I chose the Ghibli movie. So that's a clue for later, folks. But in terms of nostalgia, it's still a great year as well. That even the top 10 that doesn't have the nostalgia flicks on it, it's still like very memorable stuff. I'll just go through really quick. These are very nostalgic picks for me in terms of the honorable picks. Time Cop. Quiz Show almost made my top 10. I don't know about you, Jerome, but I just haven't seen that movie in a while, and it wasn't available on streaming. But I do remember so many great performances and shockingly a great directorial effort from Robert Redford. 4 Weddings and a Funeral, a lot of love got, there's a lot of love for that movie in 94 from the critics and stuff. It got a Best Picture nomination.
I was not impressed with that movie. I liked it. I thought Hugh Grant was very charming, and I could see why he became a star. But I was like, okay, this is good. This is not.
I mean, the 4 stories gimmick is great. I like that concept of the movie. It's just by the 3rd or 4th story, it gets really depressing.
It's a very tough concept to pull off. I feel like it was
the relationships as well. It's like, God damn, this woman is pouring her heart to you, and you got to go with the American lady.
McDowell is also not good in the movie either. That is certainly not helpful.
Yeah, it's a great concept. I think it just needed more tweaking and stuff. And I don't know. I would have went with that hot British lady. That's just me, but. Hudsucker Proxy, it's kind of a mixed bag because it's fun, but it's not the great Coen Brothers work that I'm used to. But Coen Brothers are not Jerome's not a big fan of the Coen Brothers anyway, so there you go. Mighty Ducks 2 is a fun sequel. I wanted to shout that out because I was 94. Maverick, that's a fun watch. If you're not a Mel Gibson fan, I understand, but if you want to watch Mel Gibson have some fun with, I think it was James Garner who was the original Maverick as well, so they kind of tied those two together, the show, the old movies, and the new movie. There's even a Lethal Weapon joke in there. City Slickers 2, God, I love that movie. It did not make my top 10, but goddamn, I just love Jack Palance in that role with Billy Crystal and him coming back as the twin was great. The Flintstones I mentioned before, like last week, not a great movie, but visually I think it's just so fun to watch, and the colors and the sets, designs, and all that kind of thing. So that's a fun nostalgia watch right there. Baby's Day Out, kind of a mixed bag, but I think it does have some good physical gag humor kind of thing, like for the guys getting beaten up. It's very much in the vein of Home Alone with a baby, which is obviously what they were trying to do. But I think some of the comedy in that really lands really well. We reviewed The Shadow years ago. We were very positive about it. At least I was very positive about it. So I wanted to add that to the list because it's also got a good soundtrack as well.
It's a very mixed bag. I really like the beginning of the movie, and then it just kind of gets more boring as it goes on.
Yeah, I would say that. But I think that soundtrack at the end of the song, that Taylor Dane song, just fucking is epic. So I listen to that every once in a while as well. Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which Jerome and I are big fans of. I don't know if it's going to be in your top 10. I almost put it at my number 10, but I just felt like there's a lot of stronger candidates. But man, it's such
there's a lot of strong candidates. I like it. It's very much a precursor to Scream in so many ways, and I feel like Scream is the better of those choices.
And I would say this made Freddy scary again, considering the past 2 or 3 movies before this. I think they really made him scary again, especially with the special effects and the way that he killed.
I mean, of course, Wes Craven was going to do that. And I want to point out that there are 3 Jim Carrey movies, none of which will be on my top 10. But how is 2024 ending? How is the box office ending this year, Brian? Who's the number 1 star?
Jim Carrey and Keanu Reeves are on top in a Sonic movie, which is obviously a 90s property, featuring 90s property characters, and also featuring a speed joke. A joke about the movie Speed, which we'll definitely talk about later on. But my goodness, all that stuff into one. And me and my buddy were just like freaking out nostalgia-wise because like it's finally, they gave Jim Carrey something that, it's like, hey, go do your 90s shtick. It's like, okay. And he does it in 2 roles. So
Jim Carrey is genuinely incredible in Sonic 3. And he himself is almost worth the price of admission.
And there's a lot of tiny details I would go into that movie about like the character design between the grandpa and the grandson. A little more on that later if we get to that eventually, if we review the Sonic trilogy. But man, really,
it's going to be much longer than a trilogy. And how dare you forget about the Knuckles show that was a thing on Paramount Plus?
Oh God! After 2.5 episodes, I fell asleep, and I was just, it's filler. It was COVID filler, which is fine. We got more.
COVID filler. It came out this year.
Well, it was filmed during COVID, is what I'm counting, because like a lot of the shots are wide shots with just like one person on screen talking to the CGI character. You know what I mean?
That's probably saving a hell of a lot of money too. In that way.
Sure.
So I want to point out that Blue Chips also came out this year. That is one of my honorable mentions. That movie is really good. It's much better than I think people give it credit for. This is one of Billy Friedkin's like last good movies. Nick Nolte is really good. I think Shaq and Penny Hardaway they're acceptable. I don't think they're necessarily great actors, but that is definitely one that's on my list. The Last Seduction, which was Linda Fiorentino's big breakout. I had a chance to watch that as well, and that also did not make my top 10. But it was a very interesting noir movie, acting against Peter Berg of all people, which was pretty fascinating. But unless there's anything else, Brian, I think we should get to our top 10.
Well, Interview with the Vampire, The Santa Claus, and Richie Rich. Those are like my last 3 honorable mentions. Richie Rich, I know, is not a lot of people's favorites, but man, as a kid, it's such a nostalgic trip to see
That's like Macaulay Culkin's last movie, isn't it?
It's a combination of baseball, rich kid having fun, and then having like, a McDonald's, right, in your own house. That's the dream. And then it's a kidnapping, not a kidnapping plot, like a murder plot mystery too with Larroquette, you know what I'm saying? So it's a mixed bag.
It's weird places.
Yeah, and of course Santa Claus is played every year, so I at least watched 15 to 20 minutes of that on TV this year, and it reminded me of how much I enjoyed the movie as a kid. So that's an honorable mention for me. That's kind of all my honorable mentions, and I'm ready for the top 10 when you are.
Yeah, the AMC version of Interview with a Vampire is so much better than the movie, and the movie's okay, but how do I say this delicately? The movie isn't nearly gay enough. And I think that's what makes the TV show, in that they are able to go to places that the movie was not. And it's really fascinating given the rumors about Tom Cruise, and you've got Brad Pitt. Really good Kirsten Dunst performance, but definitely not something that I would say is worthy of my top 10. Brian, I'm going to go first. My number 10, we are going to start off fast. We're going to start with Speed. So Speed is movie that we talked about earlier this year. I will refer you to that episode for more details. I think in terms of the Die Hard ripoffs, I think this is the best of those. You have the director of photography from Die Hard, John DuPont, directing the hell out of this movie. The way the bus looks, how sweaty everybody is, the look of Los Angeles, the chemistry between Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. This, in many ways, I know that Keanu Reeves was kind of a star because of Bill and Ted, but this feels like the perfect calibration of Keanu Reeves' star power, and it's something that he has definitely had difficulty with over the ensuing 30 years. But this is a great action piece, and it's something that I was reminded of how great it was earlier this year when we talked about it.
For sure, that's going to be a topic of discussion in a couple minutes because that's going to be later in my list. Number 10 is Heavenly Creatures for me. I just watched this like literally the night before this recording. I wanted to squeeze that in because it's Peter Jackson, Kate Winslet, and I didn't even know Melanie Linsky's was in it. So that was a surprise for me. I was like, why does she look so familiar? And I looked it up, and she's quite the actress, and a lot of things on her IMDb that will stick out to you, especially Last of Us. But this movie, I mean, it's very disturbing. I do feel like they didn't really have a good conclusion because it felt like a slap on the wrist at the end. Spoiler alert, these girls, 14, 16-year-olds, kill one of their mothers. It's not necessarily they get away with it. It's just that because they're underage and it's in New Zealand, the laws are different, that they got like 5 years each, but they're under the condition they can't see each other no more. So it's kind of like a lesbian love story, which for 94, very kind of almost taboo stuff. But at least this was like, they didn't really cover it up too much. They didn't make it, like subtly, like did it like overtly. And I was really impressed with that because the girls are falling in love and stuff. So I think Peter Jackson did a good job. The fantasy stuff was cool. You expect that out of a Peter Jackson movie. I was shocked at how well he nailed the drama, to be honest, because considering what Peter Jackson was directing before this, Brain Dead, Meet the Feebles, like all that crazy, wacky, gory shit, and then to do drama like this is just such a shock, and you can kind of tell why that he was able to get the money he did for The Frighteners, and then the money for Lord of the Rings, because he can actually direct drama well. He just doesn't choose to. Sometimes he wants to go with the gore stuff, and that's fine. But this movie overall, I think, is a good watch. It didn't blow me away, but I was shocked at how great the performances were. And Melanie Linsky, was probably the stand-up performance, more so than Kate Winslet. And this is Kate Winslet's first movie, so I highly recommend it. It's definitely not the top 5, but definitely bottom top 10 for sure.
This is another one of my honorable mentions because I would agree the performances are really good, but I think the ending kind of takes me out of it a little bit, and there are a little bit of moments along the way that feel like a less mature director is putting this together. And given what we know about Peter Jackson now, I think he would have, even 5 years later, been able to kind of nail this down a lot more. But it's definitely well worth seeing, and it's kind of just like Dogma was just even a couple months ago. Heavenly Creatures is kind of in a no man's land because of the Miramax ownership. So it is incredibly accessible on YouTube. You can literally find multiple copies of it. So it is, and I don't feel guilty saying that because again, it is Weinsteined. So I feel very little guilt. Please watch this movie for free and don't give Harvey Weinstein any of your money. Same thing with J.K. Rowling as well. All right, so my number 10 was Speed. My number 9, Brian, I'm gonna go a little weird on you, and I'm very curious to know if this is also on your top 10. My number 9 is Wolf.
Wow. Okay. Now, I mean, it's not in my honorable mentions. It's just that they didn't go full werewolf. That's what bugs me about that movie.
I absolutely love this movie. I saw it a couple years ago. I rewatched a couple scenes. It is very, very campy, but it is also really good. You are getting a great. Mike Nichols is channeling the crazy Jack Nicholson. There are so many great scenes of Jack Nicholson just behaving in very strange ways. You've also got a very game Michelle Pfeiffer in this movie as well, and I just love the way that it builds. I'm okay with this not going full werewolf because I think the journey they go along the way is so good. And again, I think when you have a great director like Mike Nichols, like I mentioned Peter Jackson a minute ago, like being very immature. this is a Mike Nichols who absolutely knows what he is doing, and you're getting like this late stage crazy film out of him. And to be honest, like when I was putting my top 10 together, this is definitely one that was hovering. Was it going to be in my top 10? Was it going to be an honorable mention? And honestly, given the performance of Jack Nicholson, that is really what moves this into the top 10 for me. And this is just, it is a gonzo type film. It's not quite horror, but it's got a lot of horror elements, and it's got, again, just some crazy, crazy performances out of this cast. And I kind of wish that we had gotten even more out of this movie in terms of like box office. Like it did decently well. It made over $100 million, but this is the kind of movie that I wish would get discussed even more, just because of how crazy it is and because of the stars that are involved.
Not to mention James Spader sniffing Michelle Pfeiffer like a piece of meat.
Oh man, it's so good. I mean, James Spader also a very good creepy James Spader performance too.
See, I don't know if they didn't go full werewolf because of the budget, or they wanted to recreate like there's this movie called The American Werewolf from London from the 30s, and they really do half a werewolf kind of transformation too, like a more humanoid look. So I don't know if that was an influence or not, but I don't know. I just full werewolf would have been the key.
Yeah, I do love the final battle. I think the final battle is very much makes up for the fact that it doesn't go to the place that it seemed like you wanted it to go to. But yeah, are you surprised that Wolf made my top 10?
I thought it'd be an honorable mention at least, because I was thinking about mentioning it too, but again, I expected a lot more of the horror elements in that movie. They came more of like an adult kind of drama, alpha male type competition thing, which is fine, you know, for a Mike Nichols film. I was just kind of expecting some kind of deep werewolf thing, but it wasn't that at all. But my number 9 is probably higher on your list, only because I didn't have a chance to rewatch it. But I love the cinematography in this movie. Ed Wood, black and white, the movie about the B movie maker, Ed Wood, and just the crazy casting, the cinematography. I don't think the script is like great, but I love like the visual, because that's, you know, it's Tim Burton. And then you got, you know, George the Animal Steel in a role, all kinds of crazy stuff. You know, the stuff with Bela Lugosi, just historical kind of perspective stuff, kind of see where he was in his career when he was making these B movies with Ed Wood. Martin Landau, man, what a performance in this movie. Very transcendent in terms of like looking the part of Bela Lugosi. So that was really cool. Getting the Oscar nomination for that. Yeah, just great stuff all around. I just wish I had time to rewatch it. Just because I felt like there's some stuff that I'm probably forgetting, but mainly this movie's just, you know, it's mainly known for the performances and the black and white stuff, mixed with like the tongue-in-cheek kind of comedy that goes with making a B movie. So I would have maybe had it higher, but I think right now, from comparing to where all the other stuff is on my list, this might actually end up where it was anyway if I did watch it.
So this is going to be an honorable mention. I did not list it as an honorable mention because I figured that it was going to be in your top 10, and I figured I would just wait to talk about it. I think this is a very tough movie to rewatch, because given where Tim Burton's career has gone and given everything that's gone on with Johnny Depp, it's really hard for me to watch Johnny Depp movies right now. And I think that's one of the reasons it is not my top 10. From a quality standpoint, I don't disagree with anything that you have said. I think this is one of Burton's strongest scripts. I think this is a kind of a love letter to a could have been forgotten director. And I think because of, you know, I think he had that cult following, but I think what Tim Burton did is just as a powerful director. Remember, this is a Tim Burton coming off Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns. He didn't direct Nightmare Before Christmas, but gets a lot of the credit for that movie. So after all that, he follows it up with just kind of a more of a quiet Oscar baity type of movie. And the thing is, this is a biopic, but what I love is that it covers a very specific period of time and does not try to tell Edward's whole life. And I think that is the key to a good biopic, is focus on a very specific amount of time and don't try to tell their entire life story. So this is an honorable mention for me. It is a very good watch. And if you are somebody who has not watched all of Tim Burton's filmography, this is definitely one you want to watch if you are okay with the Johnny Depp of it all. And certainly it is understandable if you're not. My number 8 is Clerks, which is Kevin Smith's very first movie. It was always going to be on my top 10. It is just a matter of where it settled in. 1994 is an incredible movie year, and I cannot, in good conscience, put this anywhere higher than number 8, given my top 7 movies of 1994. What else can be said about Clerks that hasn't been said a million times already? This being the 30th anniversary of Kevin Smith's first movie. And given the ups and downs of his career and his life, this is where it all started. And in terms of the look and the acting, this might be the worst movie on the list. But I think for so many people, this movie was an introduction to independent cinema. And I think its impact on that should never be forgotten. And given, where so many people have ended up in the Kevin Smith sphere, a lot of people have gone on to find success. I mean, Dave Klein has gone on to be a very successful director of photography. Scott Mosier co-directed one of the biggest animated movies of 2018 with The Grinch. And, Ben Affleck has gone on to be a big star. Jason Lee kind of carved something out for himself. And, so many of the other performers have gone on to extraordinary things. And yeah, Clerks is my number 8.
I will be talking about Clerks very soon on my list. So my number 8 is Pompoko, and this is a Studio Ghibli joint. I just watched it recently, directed by, oh god, I'm gonna probably butcher this, Isao Takahata. Yeah, it's not Hayao Miyazaki, but man, this is a hell of a way to like show a movie to a kid and talk about nature versus like corporations and corporate destruction of nature. My goodness, this movie is that. So it's all about these raccoons that can actually shapeshift and transform, and they're at war with the humans because their forest is being destroyed. So it's the ups and downs, right, of these raccoons trying to live with the humans and then deciding to go to war with the humans and then trying to get rid of the humans, but they can't. So the cruel, the cruel transformation twist of it all is that some of them adapt to being human just so they can have a normal life, which is so tragic if you think about it. But all these different raccoons have these different journeys and how they, approach the humans and how they interpret what the humans are trying to do. So it's very it's very funny but very sad at the same time. But it's a great watch because it's like a fantastical tale of transforming raccoons and this idea of protecting nature and this idea of the forest fighting back. So there's a lot of crazy stuff, a lot of cool visuals, all hand drawn in 94 2D. So I would say this is the second best animated movie of 1994. And man, it's a fun watch. I would definitely watch the Japanese version, the Japanese audio version, because I think the English version doesn't really translate the testicle jokes well. But the Japanese audio version totally gets the testicle jokes right on point. So there's these funny jokes about males and females in the raccoon world that they make fun of and stuff. So that's what I'm kind of talking about. But man, this movie's a fun watch, under 2 hours, and it makes you think at the end of it. And there's also some fun wrestling jokes at the beginning when the raccoons first get a TV. And just like in Japan, in Japanese culture, the first things they started to watch on TV was wrestling. So I thought that was a nice subtle commentary on the history of TV in Japan, because that's one of the first major draws on TV in Japan is watching Ricky Dozan and all that kind of thing. So that was pretty cool. That's my number 8 pick.
So this movie was not on even my honorable mentions. This is not the surprise movie that I was teasing you with, Brian. But I will say that I think this movie is good. I don't think it's great. I think that this is the problem with Studio Ghibli is that when you have a Miyazaki movie, it's going to be really, really good. And when it's not, I think it's going to be not nearly as good. And I think that's been true of the few non-Ghibli Miyazaki movies that I've watched. I've just walked away feeling very disappointed with them. I think this is an interesting concept, but it feels a little too out there, and it doesn't feel as well executed either. So this one was definitely one that I sought out because of what you had mentioned and what Ben had been mentioning as well. But this ultimately came across as kind of a disappointment for me.
Wow, but you did laugh at that wrestling joke, right? Because that was
of course,
hilarious.
Yes.
Yeah, That was such an on-point historical reference.
I mean,
too.
I knew you were going to mark out for that, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And your next pick?
My number 7 is Kung King Express by Wong Kar-wai. And Wong Kar-wai is an extraordinary director. He is definitely somebody that has influenced somebody like Barry Jenkins, and you can see a lot of his motifs and themes in Barry Jenkins, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Also borrowed different elements of In the Mood for Love and Kung King Express as well. Kung King Express is a very unique movie on this list, not just because it is the only non-American movie on my list, but because it also tells 2 different stories in an hour and 43 minutes. Who would have ever guessed that canned pineapples would be the key part of a movie set in Hong Kong? Not to mention the incessant playing of California Dreamin', which I guarantee you will get stuck in your head after you watch this movie. This is a great movie about romance, about love, and about just some of the things that occur among the characters. And you also, of course, have Tony Leung in another great iconic role. Just an incredible movie. And I'm kind of mixed on Wong Kar-wai. Again, he is definitely not a plot director. He is much more about mood and feeling. This to me, this and In the Mood for Love are the ones that stand out. And this for me is his best work. And it is one that deserves to be on my top 10.
I almost was going to watch it, but again, I just didn't have enough time, and I heard great things about it, and it's got a lot of great reviews. I think one day I'm going to finally watch it, but coincidentally, I guess, my number 7 is also from China. It's called To Live, and I don't even know if you've heard of this movie, Jerome, but I watched this movie.
With Hong Kong and China, I mean, they are not the same. Let's be clear about that.
Okay, Hong Kong and China. But have you heard of this movie, Jerome? Because I don't know. I forgot that
I definitely have not seen this. So it's funny that I definitely tried to do some 1994, and this is one that I kind of missed out on.
So I watched this in 9th grade when we were studying China and the history of China and like the Cultural Revolution and the communists takeover and all that kind of thing. So this movie takes place over 4 generations of like a family that's going through all these things. Each generation has to go through each struggle. And every time it just seems like each generation of the family goes through some tremendous tragedy. And it's so heartbreaking that there's not even like a good happy ending to this movie, as I recall, because I haven't watched this in 9th grade, but everything kind of sticks out in terms of like all the deaths and all the times that I can see my classmates crying because they get so attached to these characters and all of a sudden they tragically die at the most devastating time. And this movie is just so sad, but I think visually it's got some great looks, like they actually film it in the snow and a lot of on-set locations. But all the drama is just so like heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. There's some jokes here and there, obviously, to kind of levy some of that depressingness, but man, some of the deaths in this movie are so tragic. It's like, someone dies giving birth, like a mom dies giving birth kind of thing. And all these are the different tragic elements that happen during, like, with the background of like China's, cultural revolution and all that kind of thing going on, the Chinese Civil War, all that stuff. Throughout the 1900s, just kind of playing out over 80 years with a family. And it's just kind of like, wow, the history that their family goes through kind of makes you think about if you're like an immigrant, like, I'm a second generation, kind of makes me think of what my ancestors from the last 100, 200 years have been going through, the struggles, all the tragedies and stuff. So it really puts things in perspective, especially if like you're kind of looking back on your own culture for the last 100, 200 years and kind of figuring out, how did I even get here? How did my culture get me here to this point? So it's very like, dramatic and sad, but man, it really like shows you like life in China at that time and the struggles. But man, it's just, I remember like all the girls in the class crying, my teacher crying, even though he had seen the movie like multiple times already. And this was just halfway through the movie, as I recall. And then it gets even more sad towards the end. So just a lot of heartbreak. But man, if you need a good cry, this is the movie to watch. But as I recall, there's not even a happy ending, but it just kind of goes on through the bloodline, so to speak.
Definitely sounds like something that is well worth checking out. And it appears that it is on YouTube to watch with English subtitles. As Brian was talking, I was definitely looking out for that, and it is something that I may watch in the future Not in the mood for a good cry right now, but perhaps at some point. Can't really offer anything more because I have not seen it. But thank you for sharing all that, Brian. So my number 6, Brian, this is the movie that I was teasing you with, Quiz Show.
From Hollywood Pictures, critics are declaring Quiz Show the best American movie this year. USA Today gives it 4 stars and says Robert Redford's direction equals his Oscar-winning job on Ordinary People.
You have 21!
Joel Siegel calls it great filmmaking.
Sign this thing, sign this thing. Who cares if it's true?
It's the must-see movie of the fall.
Are you telling me everybody got the answers but you?
Quiz Show, rated PG-13.
Starts Friday at select theaters. Check newspapers for showtimes.
A really good American movie, and Robert Redford, maybe like his truly last great directorial film. Ralph Fiennes coming right off of Schindler's List, giving an excellent performance in A Year Without Tom Hanks. Maybe he gets an Academy Award. It's funny, again, 30 years later, Ralph Fiennes. Also in another underrated movie, Conclave, which has a lot of the same themes as Quiz Show. But Brian, here's the thing about Quiz Show that's great. It reminds me so much of the world of wrestling. You've got people that are, trying to set things up perfectly. They're trying to get the right looking person on there. They're trying to find the right story. They want to finish the story well. Nobody in this movie is perfect. Nobody in this story is good. In fact, you can make an argument that Herb Stempel is a genuinely terrible human being, but he is on the right side of history because of what he is arguing against and the fact that he is very much a victim of anti-Semitism. You've got David Paymer, who's a great that guy. He and Hank Azaria kind of playing these sniveling executives. You got Chris McDonald playing kind of a Ryan Seacrest-like Jack Barry. Just a really, really good. It's a very talky movie, but in so many ways, I think it reminds me a lot of All the President's Men, which Robert Redford was the star of, because of the way that it looks at corruption and the way that it looks at it from different angles and slowly unspools this great layer. And I just walked away from this on my rewatch thinking that this is one of the best American movies of that year. And the problem is, it is a year that is so loaded with great movies that it could very easily get lost in the shuffle. But it is my number 6 movie of 1994.
It was definitely in my honorable mentions. It's just I didn't have the time to watch it again. But man, there used to be this channel when I was younger called Movieplex, and they would show movies on like free cable TV. They would play this movie all the time, at least once a week, maybe. I don't know. But I would catch it in parts and then finally watch it from beginning to end when I was younger. And you mentioned that WWE type booking thing. I thought the exact same thing, but I was thinking more of like the Daniel Bryan thing when he was the B player and he wasn't the A player. You know what I'm saying? And he wasn't good enough to like have the look to be the world champion, blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what happens here. And we're on the same wavelength in terms of that, because John Turturro, my goodness, gets screwed over in this movie, but he keeps fighting and fighting, just like Daniel Bryan did. And I guess you could argue that Ralph Fiennes kind of is an innocent, I don't know, not bystander, but like, yes, he's a tool of the network and he wants his pick, but like he seems to be just kind of like, going for the ride, you know what I'm saying? Like he's just doing what he's told. So that's kind of my interpretation of the character. And like there's not necessarily, all bad guys. I would say the network is the bad guys, and I think John Turturro kind of leans towards being like a sympathetic heel sort of, but it's kind of a mixed bag, but the performances are very good. And I wanted to, it was on the verge of making my top 10, but Heavenly Creatures kind of sneaked into that spot. So my number 6 is Speed. You already mentioned it. The fact that like Speed was like a joke in the Sonic 3 movie, in a movie with Jim Carrey and Keanu Reeves in 2024, and considering the 94 was like the big year of Jim Carrey, and it's just all these weird connections to Sonic 3, and now like it's like kind of like we're reliving that 90s wave, right, with Keanu Reeves and Jim Carrey dominating the box office all over again. But man, I think Speed is just so like parody to death. And I think that adds to its legacy. I think when a movie's parodied to death like that, it sticks out for a reason. You know what I'm saying? And you could argue that something like a Mission Impossible one, where they're doing the elevated, heist with the rope around the dude's, hip, that's been parodied to death as well. That's kind of an example of that. I just think this movie is so well put together, and just, the way that LA looked in the 90s looks fantastic in the background of the windows and stuff. So great movie all around. We reviewed it. Check it out. I thought it was going to make the top 5, honestly, but, I had to reconsider some things, and my number 5 pick is more sentimental.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot to add. I think Speed is on our top 10 lists, both of our lists, for a reason. This is the first of, I think, at least a few movies that we are going to have in common here in the top 10. My number 5, now you said sentimental, is your number 5, Forrest Gump.
Paramount Pictures presents
My name's Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump.
the story of a man
Are you stupid or something? Stupid is, stupid does, sir.
who was good at just one thing: life. Tom Hanks,
I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is.
Forrest Gump, rated PG-13, starts Wednesday, July 6th at theaters everywhere.
No, we're going to talk about that soon, though.
So my number 5 is Forrest Gump, and again, this is like the first adult movie that I ever saw in theaters, and I think there are elements of it that certainly do not hold up very well at all. But this is, I think, if you approach it as a fairy tale of its time, that is very nostalgic for the 50s and the 60s. I think that is the approach that you have to go in with this movie, and I think that if you are not that person, you're not going to get very much out of it. I think Tom Hanks, there's a reason that he won back-to-back Oscars. I think it's unfortunate that because of that, I think he's kind of been taken out of any future conversations about Best Actor, even though he's done obviously great work since then. But what I think is so magical about this movie is not necessarily the tech, which of course is something that Robert Zemeckis is always trying, to his detriment, to stay on top of. But to me, what makes this movie as good as it is the fact that it keeps everything pretty tight. And again, you've got this great centerpiece performance, and justice for Robin Wright. Her character is treated very, very shabbily in this movie, but I think Robin Wright is so good in this, in what is kind of a thankless role, and one where I think she is so much the victim, and the movie doesn't really necessarily see her as such. But man, I was so impressed with her. Anytime I rewatch this, I'm always impressed with Robin Wright, and quite frankly, with a lot of the supporting performances as well. You have to mention McLady Williamson as well as Gary Sinise. I mean, this movie just has a tremendous amount of great performances from top to bottom, and even Sally Field, again, kind of a thankless role, but I think she does as good of a job, and maybe she gets one of the better lines in the entire movie as well, with what she says. So Forrest Gump is in my top 5 at number 5.
Okay, my number 5 is Clerks. I put it above Speed because I think the script, I don't know, man. Just something about this script is so real. Obviously comes from a real place in terms of like Kevin Smith's, first 2 jobs in life, working at a convenience store right next to a video store owned by the same owner and going back and forth. And obviously you see that in the movie, but man, this movie changed my perspective on movies. It introduced me to independent filmmaking. I was blown away by the fact that you could make a movie in black and white in the 90s, and then I watched Ed Wood after this. So I was just kind of like, wow, like black and white movies. There's 2 black and white movies in my top 10 from 1994. So what does that tell you? But man, I think the legacy of this movie, and I think it just grows. I mean, the older it gets, it ages like a fine wine. The older you get, the more you relate to the characters. And so it's all these different things about, life struggles, where you are in life, going back to college, all these different things. But it's also like a day in the life of kind of thing. And it's just every time I watch it, I always find something new about it, some little detail about it that I didn't notice before. And just the little things like Salsa Shark, you're going to need a bigger boat. But if you look closely, they have to put a piece of camera tape over the label of the salsa just so they don't get sued. Shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Just the little things that they had to go through while making this movie in the middle of the night. Because it's all shot in the middle of the night, portraying it as like a day kind of thing. But man, this movie changed my life, Jerome. And I know Kevin Smith doesn't have the greatest resume. I do appreciate his work every time he releases something new. But man, I can't take away the fact that this movie literally changed my perspective on filmmaking and films and what films can be and like what comedy can be. So I got to give it credit for that. And I just think that the script is so incredible in hindsight, considering it's just a bunch of like dirty jokes and stuff like that. But the realism, I think, is what really gets me every time I watch it.
Here's what I will say. In terms of Kevin Smith, I would love to see a world where he was just a screenwriter and not a director, and see what happens with his career, because I think that's kind of where his strength was more so in writing than directing for so many reasons. And it's funny, he went into the Criterion closet recently and he pulled out, a bunch of movies, and one of them was Citizen Kane. I'm like, boy, Kevin Smith certainly, while he appreciates that movie, probably didn't learn very much about camera movement and how to operate the camera very clearly, given the look of his movies. And I think that the strength is in the dialogue. It always is. And if the movie is good it's because of the performances of the writing, and almost never because of the directing. And that's what's most unfortunate. And it's definitely held him back. And you can certainly make the argument that ever since the failure of Zack and Miri Make a Porno, like it's been a real struggle. And I mean, if you want to even go back even further, because I think Jersey Girl was definitely supposed to be kind of his breakout, and ever since that movie didn't do very well, and then of course the Bruce Willis debacle, it feels like it's been a tough go for him. But from where it started, I mean, it's pretty amazing that he had a career to begin with, given where he started. But yeah, Clerks, definitely another movie we have in common in our top 10. Brian, I am going to imagine that my number 4 movie is also going to be in your top 10 as well. What I want to point out before this, to show how good 1994 is, that my number 1, 2, 3, and 4 movies on my Letterboxd account all have 5 stars. I guarantee you there is no other year in which I have 4 movies at 5 stars or better. So that should tell you how good this year is. My number 4 is The Lion King, the Disney animated version. We do not talk about the live action version, although the sequel wasn't terrible. But the animated Lion King is my number 4 pick.
From Walt Disney Pictures, the Lion King has been robbed of his throne.
Are you nuts?
And now he's lost in the jungle, where the only law of nature is eat.
Ooh, the little green film kind.
Or be eaten.
Make mine a club sandwich.
And the only way to survive,
hey, I got it,
is to make friends with the biggest guys on the block.
They call me Mr. Pig!
Only in theaters, The Lion King, rated G.
Carnivores.
Starts Friday, June 24th.
And I think this is the best Disney animated movie of all time. When Ben and I reviewed all 62 theatrically released Disney movies, this is the movie that ended up number 1 on that list, and it is number 1 for a very good reason. The story is extraordinary. The animation is beautiful. The songs, maybe one of the best soundtracks of all time in terms of Disney. And it is iconic. I don't really feel the need to talk about this movie that much, because this is probably the movie that has been the most seen of any of them. And I absolutely adore this movie. And it comes in at a clean 90 minutes. And boy, oh boy, not a wasted moment in this movie. And it is an absolute delight. And it is one that I revisit quite frequently.
My number 4 is Shawshank Redemption.
I hereby order you to serve 2 life sentences back to back.
Behind the walls of Shawshank Prison,
It's my wife! Don't you understand? My wife! Get her out!
you can't stop a man from dreaming.
There's something inside they can't touch.
Sometimes you can't stop him at all. Tim Robbins, Morgan Freeman, The Shawshank Redemption, rated R. At select theaters, September 23rd.
Out of the classics, hard-hitting classics that come out in 94, like the top of this list, I would say Shawshank is like the bottom of that list, even though it's still like an amazing movie. classic film. You know, pulls your heartstrings at the end when Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman have that reunion at the end. But I feel like a part of this movie gets a little boring sometimes when he's doing the tag stuff and they're trying to fill in that middle portion, that second act, because it's all about him escaping. But the whole idea is they're trying to like make the audience forget that he started like staring at the wall and like, what does this even mean, until you realize that he's been digging this giant hole in the wall for all these years. But man, I think the journey is incredible. It does have a good lessons in taxes, if you want to interpret it that way, because I think after watching this movie, like I started to think like maybe I should just kind of like not fuck up my taxes and kind of get shit together. And then I've been doing TurboTax ever since. Like, I don't know. It just makes you think, because like all these people, like you hear stories over the years about people not knowing how to do their taxes, getting so fucked over. Like we hear wrestlers talk about that. So I thought this was a good life lesson, to be honest. But then again, he shows you like how you can easily, manipulate your taxes and get in trouble, which obviously would happen to him. But like, and I still think this movie, like visually, is great. There's some times where I think the lighting is a little too dark, but man, I think the uniforms really pop that kind of denim blue that pops out. I think the colors are okay, but I think that denim blue is what really sticks out to me in this movie.
I think the lack of color is a choice, and I don't want to talk too much about this movie because I'll be doing it again very shortly. But I think the lack of color, unlike now, I think it's more of a choice, and I think it's a really good choice, especially given how the movie pays off.
For sure, and then like that iconic moment of him in the rain. Obviously, it's been parodied as well, so I think that's the iconic image of this movie. In terms of like Tim Robbins' best performance, I guess you would have to say this. But even though I haven't seen this full body of work, but compare it to like something like a Bull Durham, this dude really.
He's a very mixed bag. Like you would think that somebody of his caliber has a lot of classics. He really doesn't have a lot of movies that are it's this and Bull Durham, and that's really the top of the heap. And Mystic River, I guess you could also say, is on that list as well. But yeah, it's
like a proxy was on my honorable mentions. He does well with the Coen brothers, but he's just too wacky in that movie. He's definitely more mature and like straightforward in this movie, which is probably like.
I mean, this is the best performance of his career. If Tom Hanks isn't in Forrest Gump, I think he wins. I think Ray Fiennes is great, but I think this is probably the best performance in terms of male actors of the year.
And I would say out of the top 10 movies for 94, like it probably has the most cathartic moment, I would say, when he gets out and he's in the rain and it's like the freedom moment, because that's very cathartic. If you follow his journey throughout the whole movie, that one moment.
I mean, it's much more cathartic than Scar. What happens to Scar? That's for sure.
Oh yeah, even more so. Like I think that moment is so like it's very invigorating and it's very powerful. So I think that's what really sticks out for me is that one moment, especially like the look on the guard's face, or not the guard, but the warden's face when he finds the hole. I forget that.
Oh yeah, I mean that's an iconic moment. I mean that's also something that's been parodied to death too.
Yeah, for sure. So it definitely sticks out for me, and that's my number 4 pick.
So my number 3 is Hoop Dreams. I think Hoop Dreams is the best documentary that has ever been made. And I think it set us on a path for better and for worse for so many of the documentaries that we see even 30 years later. I think it is very episodic. And I think what they would do now is they would turn this into a docuseries as opposed to a 3-hour documentary. But I think this movie is extraordinary. And I think that for me, I think about, I was watching Siskel and Ebert talk about this movie as opposed to rewatching it. And the way that they talk about it is literally like you are discovering a new form. It's literally like what these producers and the people behind this, what Steve James and his crew did, they literally reinvented the wheel. And that's not something that happens very often. And regardless of where William Gates and Arthur Agee ultimately, like where they ended up, the fact of the matter is that this is the story of so many inner city youth, and you could have done this about so many kids from this area of Chicago, and just telling their story and how they ended up at St. Joseph's, and basically ending up at a place that would position them better, not just for their future in basketball, but also getting them in a better place in terms of education as well. and you get to meet their families, and you literally get to witness these two kids grow up over 5 years. And I think that's something that is really special. And I know that the UK has done something similar where they were tracking kids' lives every 7 years, and that's certainly kind of its own thing. But to me, I think in terms of a singular vision, I think Hoop Dreams is the best documentary that has ever been made. And I look, and I've seen some really good ones over the years. And certainly, I think in terms of the stories that are being told around the world, I think it's great that we have accessibility to more documentaries and the creation of more documentaries. But for me, this is the one that kind of set the template, and it is an extraordinary watch, and it is one well worth going out of your way to see because of this, more so because of the way the story is being told as opposed to the story that's being told.
Okay, I think you convinced me, but man, it's 3 hours. So if you say it's episodic, I might have to break it into parts. So that was the one thing. It's just like 3 hours. I don't know, man. That's a lot of commitment.
Binge watch TV shows that are like 6 hours, 8 hours long. I don't understand why a 3 hour movie is so.
Well, it's just like, because I've seen footage of it before. I don't know if it's maybe just that 1994 documentary style. Like, it's one thing.
I mean, it's definitely not the best looking movie of all time. Let's be clear. It's not great looking.
When you get Ken Burns' baseball and you're kind of like, it's broken down in episodes like that I can digest. But for me, it's like, I don't know, because like if one of these kids ended up being like a superstar, then maybe I'd probably more inclined to jump in. I think
that's actually the idea. The fact that they are not superstars is actually what makes the movie better.
Probably. It's just, man, I don't know. It's just going to be hard for me to kind of sit through that. So eventually, I guess I will watch it. High praise all around, obviously, but man, I don't know. It's gonna be a not a tough watch, but man, I can see myself taking pauses and stuff to get through it. But if you say it's the best of all time, and all hail Jerome, because he told me to.
I genuinely believe this is the best documentary of all time.
We'll see. We might have to do an episode about it in 2025. You never know. But my number 3 is Forrest Gump, and for all the reasons you already stated, but I think. For me personally, I think the visual look at this movie is just what gets me every time. I wasn't as high on it until the Blu-ray came out, and I was working at Blockbuster. I think I've told this story before. We put it on, and I'm watching it. I'm like, this is Forrest Gump? It looks so good. And I couldn't believe at how well the transfer was for the Blu-ray, and that shot of the Washington Monument, and then you see Jenny and Forrest like at opposite sides. And you got that giant wide shot of the monument with the water in the between. Like, to me, that's what like sold this movie, is like taking it to the other level. Because I was like, man, this movie aged better with a transfer on Blu-ray than it did when it was on VHS. And it makes you appreciate all the little digital things they did to the effects wise and putting them into the JFK footage and that kind of thing. It just seems so much clearer and more natural, actually. I don't know how they did it, but this is one of the better Blu-ray HD transfers I think I've ever seen. And it just really elevates the movie to a different level than I did when I watched it in the 90s, early 2000s. Even on regular DVD, it just didn't pop as well when it came out on Blu-ray. So in terms of that, I love the colors as well. Lieutenant Dan's a great character as well. Jenny does get a lot of she gets shortchanged, obviously. And I think if you go back now, you would obviously change that in the script. But yeah, just a lot of great, memorable stuff. It's parodied to death as well. There's a lot of emotion at the end, right? This idea that he has a son, and then you get all emotional too, because it's like, oh my God, Forrest is a dad. I never thought he'd be a dad. Oh my God, I'm crying. So there's these great emotional moments, man. So Tom Hanks just nails it. That's the performance of his career, I think. Obviously,
Bill Osmond is adorable in this movie, and I don't say that about kids a lot. Brian will attest to this. So if I say a kid is adorable, then you can damn well bet the kid's adorable.
The fact that he's mimicking Forrest's mannerisms unknowingly.
He calls him Mr. Gump it will melt your heart.
Yeah, this kid, man, Haley Joel Osment, what a career! And then he turned 13. But shit happens, so it's fine. But man, Forrest Gump, classic. I highly recommend watching this on HD and a big TV, because it'll change the way you feel about this movie if you haven't seen it in a while. And even the Vietnam stuff looks so much better I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just the way it came off of VHS, but man, the details and like the trees and stuff. This movie just gets really elevated in HD.
I mean, Robert Zemeckis, in terms of the technical aspects, I mean, I would say before he kind of got lost, before he lost the plot, I would say Polar Express is kind of where he lost the plot. I mean, he was definitely regarded as one of the best filmmakers in terms of the technical parts, and that was for a very, very good reason. All right, Brian, we are at our top two. This is where it's been serious, but now we're going to get really serious. For me, Shawshank Redemption is my number two, and if this were in almost any other year, this would probably be number one because, I mean, my God, I remember seeing this as a sophomore in high school and just being entranced by it. And it has only grown in terms of my respect for it. It's so fucking good. Like, that's what it comes down to. You talked about it earlier. There really isn't a whole lot to add to it. I think that people forget that this is an adaptation of Stephen King. I mean, singularly, period, end of story. This is the best Stephen King adaptation that has ever been created, and I seriously doubt that we will ever get better than this. And I just think that the execution across the board is extraordinary. And what this movie is able to do in 2 hours and 22 minutes, this literally invented the trope of Morgan Freeman narrating over things. I'm not sure if this is the first time he did it, but when we associate Morgan Freeman talking over and narrating, this is the movie that we are certainly coming back to. The best performance from Tim Robbins, but really, I mean, it's just a tragedy as well. You've got Bob Gutton as the warden and just how evil he is. You've got Clancy Brown, who is always an asshole. I mean, he's so good in this. Gil Bellows as Tommy. I think he does a really good job in kind of a thankless role. You've also got the tragedy of Brooks as well and struggling to come out of jail. And I think that's the thing that always impresses me the most is the sensitivity that this movie handles the people who do end up in jail and then end up coming out. Man, it is a wild to think that of the movies that came out in 1994, that this is the one that was unsuccessful at the box office. And because of cable TV, this is the movie that has probably gained the most in terms of reputation. And certainly, I think people love The Lion King. I think people are more mixed on Forrest Gump. But in terms of like the reputation, this probably has the highest of any movie that came out this year. And I think it is because of the repeated viewings on TNT. I think there is no doubt in my mind that this is one of those movies that benefited most just by being aired repeatedly, similar to It's a Wonderful Life around Christmas time.
Yeah, credit to Frank Darabont, man. He really stepped up his game, kind of transitioning from being a writer to directing. Just incredible stuff, man. And you talk about that entrancing kind of feeling. I attribute that to Morgan Freeman because that voice is just so comforting and haunting at the same time. It's no wonder that he's chosen for all these different projects for voiceovers and stuff. So credit to Morgan Freeman, man. Just really kind of like booking himself into like a corner in terms of like typecasting, but at the same time for where his age was in the 90s and the kind of transition he was going from like the 80s and 70s from those like tougher kind of tough guy roles to like this kind of like elderly guy that's kind of giving you good advice roles. I think that's a great transition for him because that's what we know him now as, like this guy that comes into movies, the elder statesman, gives good advice, tells Jim Carrey how to be a good dude, as God or whatever, and Bruce Almighty. So a lot of good things came from this in terms of like casting choices for Morgan Freeman. My number two is Pulp Fiction. And I mean, what could you say? One of the greatest scripts of all time, one of the greatest movies of all time. It brought the best out of Bruce Willis. It brought the best out of John Travolta. Uma Thurman is on top of her game. The directing is unbelievable. The cinematography is great. And just the way that it's told out of order, but somehow finds a good ending to tie it together, even though the ending takes place in the middle of the actual story. Spoiler alert. But man, I think this movie, it took Cannes by storm. It took everyone by storm. People were had this high expectation for Tarantino, considering that this is 2 years after Reservoir Dogs, and the fact that he improves over Reservoir Dogs. It's just a testament to this movie, man, and a testament to Quentin Tarantino, writer, director, in charge of his vision, in charge of his artistic vision, and just some of the details in that movie. It's just so 90s, you know what I'm saying? It's very in the 90s, but also feels 70s as well, based on the writing style and just the mysteries of that movie as well, the theories that go behind it, like what's in the briefcase, right? Is it Marcel Wallace's soul? Is it gold? What's going on? And they kind of leave that open interpretation to the audience. But man, when I saw John Travolta get killed halfway through the movie, I was like, what the fuck is going on? And then you realize it's being told out of order, and then he kind of walks away at the end of the movie, but we as the audience know he's about to get shot in about a day. Really crazy stuff, but man, a lot of lore, a lot of legendary stories about how this movie was put together. Anytime you need a body, to be covered up and taken out of your home, you call the wolf.
You do call the wolf. Harvey Keitel's entrance is definitely one of the best parts of this movie. Brian, it should come as no surprise that your number 2 is my number 1. My number 1 movie is Pulp Fiction. I think this is not only the number 1 movie of 1994, I think this is one of the best American-made movies of all time. And it is so unfortunate that, given everything that's gone on with Bruce Willis, that we didn't get more of this Bruce Willis, because him in this supporting role and what he does, he doesn't really have a lot to play on. He doesn't have John Travolta or Sam Jackson to play off of. He's kind of in his own thing, and the person that he's acting against in the two people are kind of the weakest performances of the movie. And I think what Bruce Willis does is so impressive. And not only is he showing off charisma, but he's also showing off acting chops. And that's the thing. I think it's very easy to associate Bruce Willis with, his behavior on Moonlighting, which is, justifiable in so many ways. And the fact that he was a huge action star and then was kind of in a lot of terrible movies in the last few years of his career. But this is such a great performance. And Sam Jackson as well. I think Sam Jackson should have walked away with Best Supporting Actor. I cannot believe that Sam Jackson has never won an Academy Award. I think it's kind of offensive that he hasn't, and it's especially offensive because he should have won for this movie. Because, for a movie that is regarded as John Travolta's comeback, this really does feel like Sam Jackson's movie in so many ways. And the other thing that's unfortunate to me is that this is the kind of movie where the Oscars really should have a best cast or a best ensemble, because this movie has one of the best ensembles that I've ever seen, because it's not just the fact that they're stars, but it's the fact that, Harvey Keitel's in this movie for 5 minutes and could easily be one of the best things. Christopher Walken basically has one monologue, but he is so good. It's just amazing what you see. And I haven't even mentioned Uma Thurman, and Uma Thurman is a clear highlight. Her chemistry with John Travolta is something that carries that first 45 minutes. And I think that this movie, just what it is able to do in terms of the second movie, which people always talk about the sophomore slump with these directors, this was the complete opposite. It's one of the best movies of all time. And it's just unfortunate that it did not get the Oscars love that it probably deserved to get, just because of how good the performances were, how good the writing is, and how good the directing is. Because that's the thing about Quentin Tarantino. Quentin Tarantino, I think, is an extraordinary writer. But I think when you look at the way that his directing has progressed, he gets better as a director with each movie. And I think that sort of climaxes with Inglourious Basterds. I think that is the best directed movie of his that I've ever seen. But I think in terms of the writing, I think Pulp Fiction might be the strongest. And I didn't even talk about Ving Rhames in this movie. It goes so deep.
I got to shout out Eric Stoltz, because I feel like he gets kind of lost in the shuffle in terms of 80s actors. But for the 5 minutes he's in this movie, it's he is so manic and so like unhinged, and he's like freaking out because this guy brings in this like overdosed woman to his house. He's like, why the fuck did you bring this bitch here? And he's freaking out the whole time, and like even in the background he's like freaking out while like John Travolta's trying to like put the pen in her chest. And I just think Eric Stoltz gets like, he's known for like the guy that got replaced by Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future, and as of now, it seems like that's his like biggest credit, as being the guy that was originally cast in Back to the Future. But man, I think he had some roles that like kind of showed his talent, and maybe he was too dark and gritty for the role of for Back to the Future for Marty McFly. But man, the 5 minutes in this movie, he's just like unhinged with long hair and a beard, and it's great. And then you got Rosanna Arquette as like his girlfriend, freaking out with him, but she's kind of enjoying the ride because she's like enjoying the chaos. That scene is
she's also high.
That too, but that scene is so incredible, Jerome. Like that's my favorite scene of the movie, I think, because of the hecticness and the chaos, and the fact if you watch that scene, Travolta literally drives off screen into camera frame in one take at like 50 miles an hour at night in a neighborhood. Like, what an incredible decision that was, because like God, that had to be one take, or if they fucked up, they were gonna fuck up big time and not get a second take kind of thing. So credit to the cinematographers on that movie for like stepping up in that moment and filming that, because it was incredible. So my number one, Lion King. I guess because I just have this emotional connection to it as a kid, and you can hear me talk about it and praise it in our Lion King review. But man, to me, this is the movie that sticks out the most in terms of like influence of like, today, as of this moment right now, there's screenings for like the Lion King Mufasa prequel live action movie stemming from this legacy. So even 30 years later, this legacy is still carrying the box office, so to speak. Despite mixed emotions behind as the reason why we even have a Mufasa movie or whatever. But man, Lion King is like, you said it's the greatest Disney movie ever. I also think it's the greatest Disney movie ever. In terms of like emotion and like family and storytelling, this takes the cake, I think. So much so that I think Black Panther really owes a great deal of gratitude to Lion King, because taking a lot of those similar familiar elements from Lion King and taking it and making it like into human form, so to speak. There's a lot of elements in Black Panther that I attribute to Lion King, which is why I love Black Panther so much. It's my favorite Marvel movie. And of course, Lion King has this giant legacy that I don't know. I don't think I think people are going to be so fond of this movie that there's going to be little backlash to any of these things. Like, there was backlash to the remake, yes, but it grossed $500 million domestically. So what the fuck do we know, right? Like this legacy of this movie is just going to keep grossing money. It's going to produce straight to video DVD movies. You could argue that Lion King 1.5 is one of the better straight to DVD video releases that Disney's ever done. So yeah, just so many great things about it. So much love for this movie. I mentioned the soundtrack in the previous review and how this was like a big comeback for Elton John as well, and probably one of the better performances in terms of like songwriting from Elton John, because I feel like a lot of this stuff for the Lion King soundtrack sticks out more than the stuff that he did even in the 80s. So what does that tell you? Yeah, just strong stuff all around. Saw this twice in theaters. Immediately got it on VHS. Could not stop singing the songs. Big impact on my life, and man, it really puts things in perspective when 30 years later, like, this movie has this great legacy, despite all this, like, stuff about why do we have to have live action Disney remakes anymore, and somehow getting good reviews, and Mufasa is still making money. So again, what the F do we know?
It's gotten solid reviews, but the box office has definitely been soft on Mufasa, and I will be very curious to see how Lilo and Stitch as well as Snow White do next year. I will be so curious to see. I think that, when you're talking about 1994's Lion King, though, I think you're talking about peak Disney. I don't think it's ever gotten better than that movie in so many ways. And even as, we've gotten some really great Pixar movies, I still think The Lion King kind of stands above those as well. And that's really where I come down on it. And again, you look at my top four in any other year, any of those top four, look at it. You've got what, in my opinion, is the best documentary of all time, and you've got the best Disney animated movie of all time, and that is numbers 3 and 4 on my list, respectively. That tells you how good 1994 is. Pulp Fiction is my favorite movie of all time. It is number 1. And Shawshank Redemption, I mean, again, it's crazy to think how good this year is, and especially at the top. Again, my top 4 movies would be number 1 in almost any other year.
Same to mine. It also shows you like the bottom half of our list are more like nostalgic kind of picks as well, especially like my 9 and 10 picks. But like, I don't know, if you look at the honorable mentions, even it's like a lot of fun movies came out also in '94, not just like serious big movies, but a lot of fun movies did come out.
Yeah.
And '94 just seems like a transitional
period. And you didn't even mention Star Trek Generations. I'm stunned you didn't mention Star Trek Generations.
I'm stunned we didn't mention Natural Born Killers, to be honest. So
that is probably my least favorite Oliver Stone movie. I have to be honest.
I'm not a big fan of it either, but I think Woody Harrelson is just he needed that for his career to transition.
I feel like True Romance is the better version of that.
I agree too. I definitely agree with that. It's just this was a Woody Harrelson thing. You know, I guess we talk about it now, but he did take him from like the wacky Woody character to a more serious kind of actor, right? I think he got Indecent Proposal right after this or something like that. So yeah. I had to mention that because Woody Harrelson, underappreciated actor, I think. He does get his love every now and then when he has a good performance, but man,
just don't ask him about his politics. Please.
Don't ask about his politics, but man, that transition from like '93 Woody from Cheers to this it's quite the like wow, you know what I'm saying?
All right, so that is our top 10 movies of 1994. Before we get out of here, we are going to recap our list, so I think it would be very appropriate to do so. I will go first. So my top 10 1994 movies are as follows. Just to repeat, my number 10, Speed. Number 9, Wolf. Number 8, Clerks. Number 7, Kung King Express. Number 6, Quiz Show. Number 5, Forrest Gump. Number 4, Lion King. Number 3, Hoop Dreams. Number 2, Shawshank Redemption. Number 1, Pulp Fiction.
My number 10, Heavenly Creatures. Number 9, Ed Wood. Number 8, Pompoko. Number 7, To Live. Number 6, Speed. Number 5, Clerks. Number 4, Shawshank Redemption. Number 3, Forrest Gump. Number 2, Pulp Fiction. And number 1, in my heart, Lion King.
All right, so that is it for us for 2024. 2025, we're going to be doing some different things. We're going to kind of be rotating months, and Brian has got the month of January. Tell everybody, what are we doing in January, Brian?
It's January with Jackie Chan. So I wanted to kind of look back at some old Jackie Chan movies. I've been watching some on Tubi, Amazon Prime. They have a lot of them on there. But I wanted to focus on the 80s, more specifically because I felt like there's some underappreciated hidden gems from the 80s in terms of Jackie Chan. So first, we're gonna start out with the Brawl movie. I'm forgetting the title right off the top of my head, but it's this big brawl movie. I think it's called The Big Brawl, 1980, and basically it's just like it leads to a giant Royal Rumble at the end. So I decided to pair it with the right match with not one but two Bunkhouse Stampede matches. One from WWF, which I was in shock to find because WWF and Bunkhouse Stampede just doesn't mix, but also one from the NWA, obviously. NWA Crockett, they're known for creating the Bunkhouse Stampede, 20-man no disqualification battle royal. I was going to pick the one in the cage, but that's the least favorite one because it's so like the opposite of what a Bunkhouse Stampede is supposed to be. It's just kind of like everyone's stuck in a cage and no one can move around, and it gets kind of wonky halfway through, and then all the eliminations happen via over the top or through the door, which is ridiculous. But it's going to be a fun watch because I really appreciate the Bunkhouse Stampede when it's just a battle royal. And when it's just like, you know, it's called The Big Brawl, and just this idea of like a battle royal, no DQ, come as you are.
Let me guess, you picked one that Dusty Rhodes won.
Surprisingly, no. The one that I found that was like a full version of this match too, and spoiler alert, it's the Road Warriors, but one of them only wins. I'm not going to tell you how they figured that one out, but it was around like right after Starrcade '86 is I think the date of this, so it's very much they're tying in that Midnight Express Road Warriors post scaffold match type stuff, and There's some other familiar faces like the Rock and Roll Express are in it, but the one from WWF is interesting because it focuses more on Blackjack Mulligan, which we'll talk about, because Blackjack Mulligan had this brief run in WWF right before WrestleMania 3, and they were pushing him hard, and then he just disappears. So we'll talk about that as well. So after the big brawl, we're going to be watching Winners and Sinners, which is like an ensemble kind of piece with all his friends, and it's directed by Sammo Hung. And then Project A, which is the famous one where you see that footage of him going from like 3 stories down and then landing on his head and breaking his neck during the filming of the movie, also directed by Sammo Hung. And then the last of our January with Jackie is going to be Armor of God, which I watched as a kid, and I love that movie a lot. It's kind of like an Indiana Jones type movie with Jackie Chan. Awesome soundtrack. I actually watched the sequel first because in America they released the sequel before the original for some reason, and then they switched the numbers. So I don't know why they did that, but there's a great song sung by Jackie Chan in that one called High Upon High, which is used by the Stoner Brothers in indie wrestling right now. Get that connection. But yeah, it's going to be fun. January with Jackie Chan, and it's him in the 80s having fun. Not necessarily being the 90s action star, but being that fun 80s Chinese, Hong Kong action star that you hear murmurs about, but that's not necessarily broken into the U.S. yet. So this is right before he breaks out of the U.S., all these different movies.
All right, so I will very much look forward to watching a number of Jackie Chan movies. For Brian, I am Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.